My husband said, "I'm in love with your sister. We've been together for 2 years." I quietly nodded. I picked up my phone and texted her 3 words. An hour later, she was standing on our doorstep in tears. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had the kind of life people quietly envied, not in a showy way. Nothing we owned was flashy or expensive, but we had a house with a real backyard in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, a golden retriever named Biscuit who destroyed every throw pillow we ever bought, and a marriage that looked, from the outside, like the kind that lasts. My name is Claire. Claire Merritt, though for 11 years I'd been Claire Hargrove, 37 years old, a high school English teacher, a wife, a sister. That last word is the one that eventually broke everything. My husband Daniel was 41, an architectural project manager who drove a sensible gray Subaru and coached youth soccer on Saturday mornings. He was the kind of man who remembered to service the furnace before winter and who brought me coffee exactly the way I liked it. 1 sugar, a splash of oat milk, without being asked. Our life together had a comfortable rhythm. Dinner at 7, walks with Biscuit after, weekends that blended into each other pleasantly, like watercolors left in the rain. My sister Jenna was 33. She lived 20 minutes away in a renovated apartment in the short north. She was a graphic designer, unmarried, effortlessly pretty in the way younger sisters so often are. We talked twice a week, met for brunch most Sundays. She was my closest friend, or so I believed. Looking back now, I can identify the exact moment the thread began to loosen. I just didn't know to pull it at the time. It was a Thursday evening in late October. I'd come home early from a department meeting that had been mercifully cut short. Daniel's car was in the driveway, which was unusual. He normally stayed at the office until 6:30, sometimes 7. I remember feeling a small, warm flicker of pleasure. An unexpected evening together. I came through the side door into the kitchen, and I heard him laugh. Not his polite laugh, not his professional laugh, his real one. The one I only heard when he was completely relaxed. He was on the phone. He stepped into the hallway the moment he heard my keys, and the laughter stopped with a suddenness that I registered somewhere beneath my conscious mind and promptly ignored. "Hey," he said, "didn't expect you back yet." "Meeting ended early," I said. I kissed him on the cheek. He smelled faintly of cologne. He didn't usually wear cologne on a Thursday. I ignored that too. Over the following weeks, I noticed things in the way you notice small drafts in a house. You feel them without ever pinpointing the source. Daniel began checking his phone differently, not more often but more carefully, tilting the screen away, exiting apps with a deliberate tap before setting it face down on the counter. He started going to the gym on Wednesday evenings, which was new. He became slightly more attentive to me, more considerate in a way that felt rehearsed, the guilt compensation of a man who was managing his conscience through gestures. And Jenna, I think about Jenna often now, about how I missed it with her. She began to cancel our Sunday brunches with increasing frequency, small excuses, a migraine, a client deadline. Once, memorably, a friend's birthday brunch she'd supposedly forgotten about. She texted more than she called. When we did meet, she was warm, but there was a layer of glass between us. I thought she was stressed about work. I thought she was going through something private that she'd share with me when she was ready. I thought a great many wrong things. It was a Sunday in mid-January when it happened. Daniel and I had just finished dinner. I was washing the dishes and he was at the kitchen table, and I remember the specific quality of the silence before he spoke. Dense and deliberate, the silence of a man who had rehearsed. "Claire," he said, "I need to tell you something." I turned off the tap. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I turned around. He looked at the table when he said it. "I'm in love with Jenna. We've been together for 2 years." The room did not tilt. My legs did not give out. I did not scream. People always imagine they would scream. I stood very still. I looked at him, and I nodded. One slow, composed nod, the way you might acknowledge information you had, on some level, already known. Then I picked up my phone from the counter, and I typed 3 words to my sister. "Come home now." I pressed send. I set the phone face up on the counter. I looked at my husband and I said nothing at all. And in that silence, I began to build. She arrived 53 minutes later. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave the entire time Daniel and I sat in the living room without speaking. He had tried once to say something with the word complicated in it. And I had looked at him with an expression that stopped him completely. I wasn't performing calm. I genuinely felt it, which frightened me more than anything else that night. What did it mean that your world could be dismantled in a single sentence and your primary response was arithmetic? Because that's what my mind was doing. It was counting. 11 years of marriage. The house purchased jointly in 2017, a mortgage with 14 years remaining, our joint checking account, our joint savings, $62,000 accumulated carefully over a decade of packed lunches and skipped vacations, a retirement account in both our names, Daniel's income, which was nearly double mine, Biscuit, asleep at my feet and entirely unaware that the architecture of his world was collapsing. And Jenna, 2 years, 24 months of Sunday brunches and phone calls and birthday dinners at which she had sat across from Daniel and played the role of devoted sister-in-law while conducting a life I knew nothing about. 2 years of looking me in the eye. The doorbell rang. I opened it myself. Jenna stood on the porch in a coat I recognized. I had helped her pick it out last November at a vintage shop in the short north. Her eyes were already red, which told me she had cried in the car on the way over, which told me she had known exactly what those 3 words meant, which told me everything. "Claire," she started. "Come in," I said, and I stepped aside. What followed was not a scene from a film. There was no screaming. There was no throwing of objects. The 3 of us sat in my living room, the living room where Jenna had spent countless Christmases and Thanksgivings, and I listened to them speak. Daniel explained. Jenna wept and apologized repeatedly in the spiraling way of someone who needs absolution more than they need to give it. I asked 2 questions. When did it start? And does anyone else know? And I received answers that I filed away with the methodical efficiency of a woman who had already decided, somewhere in that 53-minute silence, that she was not going to fall apart. 2 years ago, August. And no one else knew. Good, I thought. Then neither do they know what I'm about to do. I asked them both to leave. Jenna asked if she could stay. Actually asked that, as though my guest room were still a natural offering. Daniel asked where he should go. I told him a hotel. I told him to take enough for a week. He packed a bag in the bedroom while Jenna hovered in the hallway and I stood in the kitchen making tea I didn't drink. After they left, the house was very quiet. I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I began to write. Not feelings, facts, a list of assets, a list of accounts, a list of what I knew and what I needed to find out, because fear was there. It pooled beneath the calm like cold water. But I had taught literature for 12 years, and I knew what happened to women who acted from fear. They made desperate, visible moves. They tipped their hand. They let the other side set the terms. I was not going to let anyone set my terms. The first thing I needed was information, not assumptions, not suspicions. Documented, verifiable information. What were our shared finances exactly? Were there accounts I didn't know about? Had Daniel made any large withdrawals or transfers in the past 2 years? Had he already, quietly, begun to prepare? The second thing I needed was a lawyer, not a mediator, not a couples counselor, a divorce attorney. Experienced, sharp, and consulted before Daniel had any indication I was moving. The third thing, and this one came to me slowly over the second cup of tea I actually did drink, somewhere around midnight, was leverage. Not revenge, not cruelty. Leverage. The kind that comes from knowing more than the other side believes you know, and moving before they expect you to move. I opened my laptop. I began searching, and by 2 a.m, I had the name of a family law attorney in Columbus with a 17-year track record and a reputation for representing women in high-asset divorces. Her name was Patricia Osei. Her consultation fee was $300. I wrote the number on my legal pad. I underlined it twice. Then I closed the laptop, washed my teacup, and went to bed. Biscuit jumped up beside me. I put my hand on his warm back and stared at the ceiling. What had I missed? I asked myself in the dark. What else don't I know? Those questions, I realized, were going to be the engine of everything that came next. I called Patricia Osei's office the following Monday morning from my car, parked 2 blocks from the school where I worked. I didn't make the call from home. I'd already checked whether our internet router logged device activity, and I wasn't certain enough about the answer. Paranoia, maybe. But I'd learned in the past 72 hours that I had been catastrophically unobservant for 2 years. I was not going to be unobservant again. The consultation was scheduled for that Wednesday, during my free period and lunch block combined. I told the school secretary I had a dentist appointment. Patricia Osei was a small, precisely dressed woman in her early 50s who wore reading glasses on a gold chain and who listened to my summary of the situation without a single interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Have you told him you're consulting an attorney?" she asked. "No." "Good. Don't." She set down her pen. Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, but it's also an equitable distribution state. That doesn't mean equal. It means what the court considers fair given the circumstances. Length of marriage, income disparity, contributions to the marital estate. You have a strong position, 11 years, combined assets, and you've been contributing to his career stability as the lower-income spouse who maintained the household. I asked about the timeline. She was honest. Contested divorces in Franklin County could take anywhere from 8 months to 2 years, depending on cooperation. "Is there any reason to believe he'll be uncooperative?" she asked. I thought about Daniel, his careful managerial mind, his instinct toward appearances. "He'll want it to look reasonable," I said. "Whether it actually is remains to be seen." She nodded. "Then our first step is a full financial inventory. I'm going to need documentation, tax returns for the past 3 years, bank statements, mortgage records, retirement account balances, everything you can access without alerting him." I had already begun pulling those documents. I told her so. She looked at me over her reading glasses with something that might have been approval. I left her office with a formal retainer, signed and a folder of instructions. I drove back to school and taught 2 sections of American literature with my hands perfectly steady. Meanwhile, the cracks were beginning to show. Not in me, but in them. Daniel texted that Wednesday evening. "Can we talk? Not about us, about logistics." I replied, "Not yet. I need more time." It was a strategic answer, vague enough to seem like grief, firm enough to buy me space. Jenna called twice. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that was almost entirely crying with a few audible words in the middle. "Please, and I'm so sorry, and I know this is my fault." I saved the voicemail. I wasn't certain I'd need it, but I was done making assumptions about what I would or wouldn't need. It was my colleague and closest friend at school, Margaret, who taught history and had been divorced herself 8 years ago, who gave me the name of a forensic accountant. We were sitting in the teacher's lounge on a Thursday, and I told her quietly the outline of what had happened. Not everything. Enough. "Get a forensic accountant before you do anything else," she said without hesitation. My ex had a whole shadow account I didn't know about for 4 years. By the time I found out, half of it was gone. The forensic accountant, a man named Robert Haas, who worked out of a beige office near the Dublin Road corridor, found what I would not have found alone. In the past 22 months, Daniel had made 31 transfers from our joint savings account to a personal savings account held in his name only. The amounts were individually small, between $400 and $900 each, carefully calibrated to remain below the threshold that might trigger my attention or a bank notification. In total, just over $18,000, quietly redirected over the course of a relationship he'd been conducting in the same house where I slept. Robert Haas printed the report and set it on the desk between us. I looked at the numbers for a long time. Had he been planning this from the beginning? Had every Wednesday gym session, every tilted phone screen, every rehearsed gesture of consideration been calculated? Or had he simply been afraid, and fear had made him methodical in exactly the same way it had made me methodical? It didn't matter. The answer didn't change the document in front of me. This was the point of no return, not Daniel's confession. That had been a door swinging open. This was the door locking behind me. I authorized Robert Haas to compile a complete forensic report. I forwarded the preliminary findings to Patricia Osi that same evening. She called me back within the hour. "This changes the calculus significantly," she said. "Financial dissipation of marital assets during the marriage. We can argue this directly." A pause. "Claire, are you ready to file?" I was sitting at my kitchen table. Biscuit was under my feet. The house was quiet and entirely, completely mine in a way it had never felt before. "Yes," I said, "file it." The divorce petition was filed on a Tuesday morning in February. Daniel was served at his office. Patricia had specifically advised against serving him at home, both for logistical safety and, frankly, for strategic impact. A process server delivering papers at an architectural firm of 40 people communicates something that a quiet kitchen conversation does not. He called me 47 minutes after service. I let it go to voicemail. His message was measured initially. He said he was surprised. He said he thought we'd agreed to take time before making decisions. He said, and this was the word that told me everything about how his mind was framing the situation, he said he thought we'd been communicating. I called Patricia instead and told her to expect contact from his attorney. What I had not anticipated was Jenna. She appeared at my front door on a Thursday evening unannounced, not crying this time. She was composed in a way I recognized. The same controlled composure she'd deployed, I now understood, for 2 years. She'd brought wine, as though this were a difficult conversation situation rather than what it actually was. I opened the door but didn't step back to invite her in. "I need you to hear me," she said. "I've heard you," I said. "Claire." Her voice dropped. if you go through with this, all the way through with this, Daniel is going to lose his position. His firm doesn't look kindly on personal scandal. He could lose his job. I waited. And if he loses his job, she continued, the kind of settlement you're expecting, it won't exist. You'll be dividing a fraction of what you think you're going to get. I looked at her for a moment. My little sister, standing on my porch with a bottle of wine, explaining the financial consequences of my own divorce to me as though I were a student who hadn't done the reading. "Were you there for 2 years?" I asked her. She blinked. "What?" "In my house, at my table, at my holidays, while this was happening. Were you there?" "Claire, that's not—" "Then you understand," I said, "that I have already calculated every risk you're describing." I reached for the door handle. "Don't come here again without calling first." I closed the door. She didn't leave immediately. I heard her stand on the porch for almost a full minute before her footsteps retreated down the path. And then, 3 days later, Daniel's attorney sent a letter that escalated so sharply it briefly took my breath away. The letter alleged that I had improperly accessed marital financial records and engaged a forensic accountant without Daniel's knowledge or consent, and that I was now attempting to characterize legal and consensual personal financial management as dissipation of marital assets. The letter further suggested that if I continued on this path, Daniel's legal team would argue that my emotional state following a difficult personal disclosure had caused me to pursue litigation in bad faith. Difficult personal disclosure. That was the phrase they used for what he had done to 11 years of my life. I forwarded the letter to Patricia with a single line. "What do we do with this?" Her response came within 2 hours. Exactly nothing. "This is noise. We have the forensic report. They don't have a counter-argument. They have threats. Let them make them on the record." She was right. I knew she was right. But I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time that evening because the threat had done what it was designed to do. It had made me feel, briefly, like a woman acting out of grief rather than reason, like someone who could be dismissed. And that was the most dangerous thing anyone could make me feel. I gave myself 3 days, 3 deliberate, quiet days in which I did not read emails, did not respond to texts, did not think about depositions or forensic reports or anyone's legal strategy. I took Biscuit to the park every morning. I cooked real meals. I called my mother, who lived in Scottsdale, and talked about her garden. I did not tell her about the divorce. Not yet. I needed those 3 days to be about nothing except remembering who I was when no one was trying to manage me. On the 4th morning, I made coffee. I opened my laptop, and I went back to work. The attempt at seduction, and I can only call it that because it was designed to pull me off my foundation, came from Daniel directly, which surprised me. I had expected another letter from his attorney. Instead, he emailed me personally, bypassing the legal channels entirely, which Patricia later told me was either a strategic mistake or a deliberate gamble. The email was long. I won't reproduce all of it. But the core of it was this: he was sorry. Not for the affair, that word was carefully absent, but for the way he had told me, for the timing, for the impact it had had on my stability. He wrote that he still cared about me as a person, that he believed we were capable of handling this like adults, and that he was willing to propose a generous settlement without litigation if I was willing to have a single private conversation, just the 2 of us, no attorneys. He used the word friendship at the end. I read the email once. I forwarded it to Patricia. Then I closed my laptop and graded a set of junior essays on Their Eyes Were Watching God, which felt, under the circumstances, almost gratuitously appropriate. I was not angry. That was the thing I kept noticing. The anger I'd expected, the volcanic fury that surely lived somewhere beneath the calm, was simply not presenting itself. What I felt instead was a kind of cold, clear attentiveness, as though a long, blurred lens had finally been adjusted. I was seeing everything very precisely. Daniel's email was not remorse. It was a de-escalation tactic. His attorney had advised him, probably, that the forensic report made litigation unfavorable and that settling privately, outside of documented legal proceedings, was his best available option. The appeal to friendship was a lever, not a feeling. I did not respond to the email. Jenna, meanwhile, had shifted tactics. She stopped coming to the house. She stopped calling. Instead, she began a very quiet, very deliberate campaign of social repositioning. I heard about it through Margaret first. Jenna had apparently told a mutual friend, a woman named Dana who knew us both through a book club we'd all once attended together, that I had shut her out completely and was refusing to process the situation. The implication, subtle, carefully planted, was that my composure was coldness, my legal action was aggression, and my refusal to engage with apologies was the true cruelty in the situation. Did they actually believe that? Did they expect that I would engage with a reframing that replaced 2-year affair with my sister with family communication breakdown? Margaret told me about it over coffee in her classroom after school, watching my face carefully. "You're not surprised," she said. "No," I said. "What are you going to do about Dana?" "Nothing," I said. "Dana isn't the audience that matters." The audience that mattered was the Franklin County Family Court, and on that stage, Jenna's social maneuvering was entirely irrelevant. But it told me something important. It told me that they were watching me, calibrating their response to my behavior, trying to gauge where my weaknesses were. The social campaign was a probe. They wanted to know if I could be destabilized publicly, shamed into pulling back, worn down by isolation. The answer was no, and the reason was Margaret and the school counselor, Lynn, who I finally told the whole story to over a glass of wine on a Friday evening, and who said with characteristic directness, "Good. Burn it down legally and completely." And it was my friend Carrie, who drove up from Cincinnati for a weekend and slept in the guest room and watched movies with me and did not offer a single piece of advice unless I asked for it. And it was, gradually, my mother, who I finally called with the full story on a Sunday afternoon, and who was quiet for a long moment before she said, "Baby, you should have called me in January." None of these women told me what to feel. They simply refused to let me be alone in it. And that, the refusal to let me be alone, was what kept the cold attentiveness from becoming something harder and more brittle. I had people. They did not. That asymmetry, I understood, was going to matter. They came together. That was what I hadn't expected. It was a Saturday in early March, mid-morning. I was in the backyard with Biscuit drinking coffee when the doorbell rang. I wasn't alarmed. I was expecting a delivery. I came through the house, still in my weekend clothes, coffee mug in hand, and opened the front door to find Daniel and Jenna standing side by side on my porch. Daniel was in a collared shirt, which told me this had been planned. Jenna was holding a paper bag from the bakery on 5th, the one we'd gone to together for years, the one that made the almond croissants I loved. It was a deliberate detail, a prop. I noticed Jenna had also done her hair carefully, and Daniel had shaved, which he often skipped on weekends. They had prepared for this visit the way people prepare for a performance. They had rehearsed. "We're not here to fight," Daniel said immediately, which is precisely what people say when they are preparing to fight. I looked at them both. I didn't open the screen door. "You're not invited in," I said. "Claire." Jenna's voice was soft, practiced. "We've been talking, and we really think, that there's a way through this that doesn't have to be this ugly. You're spending money you don't have on attorneys and accountants, and for what? You're destroying the family over something that can be handled like grown adults. Destroying the family." I held that phrase up in my mind and examined it. Which family exactly? The one that had existed before January, or the one that had been operating in secret for 2 years while I packed lunches and walked the dog and graded papers? The family that had sat around my Thanksgiving table while this was already happening. While they were already happening? "We want to propose a private settlement," Daniel said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. "Fair and reasonable. We had someone neutral look it over. It's a clean number. You'd be able to stay in the house through the end of the school year and then sell it," I said. He blinked. "Eventually, yes. It's a marital asset. Assessed in a forensic report that your attorney tried to have excluded," I said pleasantly. A pause. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, just slightly. The management facade slipping 1 centimeter. Jenna stepped in. "We know you're angry." She said it gently, like a therapist. "That's completely valid. What happened to you is unfair, and neither of us is pretending otherwise. But Claire, listen. Dragging this into a courtroom doesn't give you back what you lost. It just hurts everyone, including you. The legal fees alone." "I'm aware of my legal fees," I said. "The school community," she continued, and something shifted in her tone. Subtle, but I caught it. "People talk. I know you care about your reputation there. If this becomes public and messy—" And there it was. I looked at my sister, my little sister, who I had helped pick out her first apartment furniture and talked through her college breakups and loved completely and without reservation for 33 years, who had sat in this house, in this neighborhood, on this very porch, more times than I could count. And now she was standing on that same porch, using my professional life as a pressure point, using the thing I had built entirely on my own, my classroom, my reputation, 12 years of showing up, as a lever to protect the life she had built on top of mine. "Are you threatening me?" I asked quietly. "Of course not." Too quickly. "I'm just saying that—" "You're standing on my porch," I said, "with a paper bag from my favorite bakery, telling me that if I pursue my legal rights in court, my professional reputation may suffer. That is a threat, Jenna. I need you both to hear me say that clearly." Silence. Daniel opened his mouth. I looked at him, and he closed it. "I'm not signing anything you've brought to my door," I said. "If your attorneys want to discuss settlement terms, they can contact Patricia Osei. That's what she's there for." I looked at Daniel. "This is the last time I'll open this door to either of you without my attorney present." I stepped back. I closed the screen door, and then I closed the main door. I stood in my hallway and listened. Low voices on the porch, urgent, clipped. Then something sharper, a brief argument between them that told me the unified front had been thinner than it appeared. A car door, then another, then silence. I set my coffee mug down on the hallway table. My hand, I noticed, was not quite steady. Not from collapse, from adrenaline, which is a different thing entirely. The fear was present. It sat in my chest like a stone. But beneath it, or perhaps alongside it, was something that felt like heat. A focused, clarifying burn. They had come to my house. They had tried to use the bakery and the word family and the quiet threat of professional gossip and a folded piece of paper with a number designed to look generous. They had dressed carefully, rehearsed their lines, and stood on my porch with the confidence of people who expected me to open the screen door and accept what they had brought. And they had failed. The stone in my chest and the heat beside it merged into something I couldn't quite name, but it pushed me forward, and that was all I needed it to do. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. She needed to know they'd attempted direct contact again, bypassing the established legal channels for the second time. She needed to know about the implication regarding my professional reputation, the pressure tactics, the unannounced joint appearance, because these were things she was going to document. These were things I understood with perfect clarity now that were going to matter. The deposition was scheduled for a Wednesday in April, 8 weeks after we'd filed. Both Daniel and his attorney were present, along with Patricia and a court reporter whose quiet keystrokes became, over the next 3 hours, the sound of a structure falling. I was not, technically, required to be there for Daniel's portion. Patricia had suggested I attend. Sometimes presence is its own argument, she said. So I sat at the conference table in a gray blazer with a legal pad and a pen, and I was perfectly still. I had slept well the night before, which surprised me. I had made breakfast. I had driven to the building on Route 23 with the radio on and found a parking space on the first attempt, which felt, absurdly, like a good omen. The forensic report was introduced in the first 40 minutes. Robert Haas had testified earlier in the week in a separate session, and his documentation was now part of the formal record. 31 transfers, $18,000, 22 months. Daniel's attorney had spent considerable energy arguing that these were legitimate personal savings, not dissipation of marital assets. Patricia allowed the argument to develop. She was patient in a way I had come to understand was purposeful. She let opposing counsel construct a building before she removed the foundation. I had seen her do this in smaller exchanges over the preceding weeks, and I had learned to recognize the particular quality of her stillness when she was waiting. She was waiting now. "Mr. Hargrove," she said finally, "can you identify this document?" She slid a bank statement across the table. Daniel glanced at his attorney, then at the document. "It's a bank statement," he said carefully. "Specifically, a statement for the personal account to which 31 transfers were made over a 22-month period. Can you confirm this account was opened in August 3 years ago?" A pause. I'd need to verify the date. The account was opened August 14th. Patricia laid another document alongside it. "Which is the same month you've testified," in response to my colleague's earlier question about the timeline, "that your relationship with Jenna Calloway began." The room was very quiet. Had Daniel really believed that the timing wouldn't surface? Had he genuinely thought in some carefully compartmentalized corner of his organized, managerial mind that the finances and the affair could be argued as entirely separate rooms with no connecting door? Or had he known, somewhere beneath the strategy, that this moment was inevitable, and had proceeded anyway, the way people proceed when they have convinced themselves they will figure out the next problem when they reach it? Daniel's attorney interjected with an objection about relevance. Patricia noted the objection and continued. "Mr. Hargrove, in the 12 months prior to August 3 years ago, how many transfers were made from the joint marital account to a personal account?" A longer pause this time. "I don't recall specific transactions from 3 years ago." "The forensic report does." She laid the summary in front of him. 0 transfers in the 12 months prior. 31 transfers beginning in the same month your relationship with Miss Calloway began. totaling $18,420. The attorney leaned toward Daniel and murmured. Daniel's jaw was very tight. I did not look away from him. I sat with my pen on my legal pad, and I did not look away. I was not performing composure. I simply had nothing in that moment that required concealing. I had spent 3 months building this room, document by document, and now I was sitting in it, and it was exactly the room I had built. Mr. Hargrove, Patricia continued, did you use any funds from the marital account to pay for travel, accommodation, or gifts during your relationship with Ms. Calloway? The attorney objected. Patricia rephrased. What emerged over the next hour was a picture that even I, who had spent weeks preparing for this room, found more complete than I'd expected. The personal account had been used to book hotel stays, 3 out of state, twice in Columbus itself, once in Nashville, restaurant charges, and twice jewelry purchases that appeared in the card statements, jewelry that I had never seen, small specific line items that were, individually, entirely ordinary, and that assembled themselves, in the aggregate, into something undeniable. Where was that jewelry now? Was Jenna wearing it? Was it in a drawer in her renovated apartment in the short north, tucked beneath other things, existing in that parallel life the way everything in those 2 years had existed, carefully kept out of sight, just slightly to the left of where I was looking? Daniel's composure fractured in increments. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. He wasn't the type, and I knew him well enough to know he would hold his external form for as long as physically possible. But there were moments when his answers became marginally slower, when he glanced at his attorney with a frequency that communicated something below language, when his hands, folded on the table, pressed more tightly together, the knuckles shifting color. He had walked into this room believing, I think, that the financial argument could be managed, that what was documented could be partially redescribed, minimized, reframed as responsible private planning by a man prudently protecting his own future. He had not accounted for the timeline. He had not accounted for the receipts. He had not accounted for the fact that I had spent 3 months in that kitchen making lists, and that every item on those lists was now in a folder in front of Patricia Ocey. At the end of the session, when Patricia gathered her documents with the efficient, unhurried movements of someone who has done exactly what she came to do, his attorney requested a brief recess for a private consultation. The court reporter went to check her phone. I poured water into a glass and drank it slowly. Daniel looked at me across the table. Just once, for just a moment. There was something in his expression I couldn't entirely read. Not remorse, exactly, and not anger. Something more like the specific exhaustion of a man who has arrived at the end of a road. He paved himself and finds it exactly where logic always said it would be. I looked back. I held his gaze for 3 full seconds, then looked down at my legal pad. I felt nothing theatrical, no triumph, no residual grief, no desire to speak or to wound or to be seen feeling anything in particular. What I felt was the clear, settled certainty of a woman who had done exactly what she said she was going to do, in exactly the order she had planned to do it. That, I had learned, was enough. It had always been enough. The settlement offer came 14 days after the deposition, not from Daniel directly, through his attorney, formally, to Patricia. The number was considerably different from the folded paper that had been offered at my door in March. Patricia called me on a Thursday evening. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when my phone rang. "They've moved significantly," she said, and I could hear in her voice the particular satisfaction of a professional who has steered a case to exactly where she intended it to go. "Do you want me to walk you through the terms?" I made tea. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had told me everything, and where I had started making lists, and where I had eaten alone for 3 months and found, gradually, that eating alone in your own house is not the punishment it first appears to be. I said yes. Walk me through it. The house was mine. Not through the end of the school year, not as a temporary arrangement pending sale. Mine, in full, with Daniel refinancing the mortgage into my name alone and compensating me for his share of the equity in a lump sum payment. His firm had not terminated him, but had demoted him to a project coordinator role following an internal review triggered by the publicity that naturally accompanies a filed divorce petition in a firm of 40 people. The lump sum came partly from the personal account, the $18,000 returned in full, and partly from the liquidation of a retirement account he had not disclosed until the deposition process made concealment untenable. The total settlement was just over $200,000. The equity payout, the return transfers, a portion of his retirement assets, and an alimony arrangement running for 4 years, calibrated to the income disparity Patricia had argued from our first consultation. It was not everything that could have been litigated. Patricia told me we could push further, take this to trial and potentially do better, though trial carried its own risks and timelines. I told her to accept the settlement, not because I was exhausted, though I was, not because I wanted it to be over, though I did, but because I had been precise about what I wanted from the beginning: the house, the financial security, and the documented legal record of what had actually happened. I had all three. Going further meant more months in the machinery of litigation, more months of this defining my calendar and my mental landscape. I had won what I came for. I was not going to negotiate myself out of my own victory by reaching for more than I had ever asked for. I was done being defined by Daniel's choices. The paperwork was signed over 3 separate sessions at Patricia's office. Each time I read every document before I signed it, slowly, without apology for the time it took. At the final session, Daniel was present in the conference room. He looked older than he had in January, the particular aging that comes not from time, but from consequence. He signed every document without attempting to speak to me. His attorney made one last attempt to revise a minor clause regarding the alimony adjustment schedule. Patricia declined pleasantly, produced the supporting case law within 90 seconds, and the clause remained unchanged. When it was done, I shook Patricia Osei's hand in the lobby. She squeezed my hand once and said, "Take care of yourself," and I said I intended to. I walked out into an April afternoon. The sky was the particular pale blue of Ohio in early spring, tentative, not quite committed to warmth, but gesturing toward it. I had no dramatic thought. I was simply a woman in a gray blazer standing on a sidewalk on a Tuesday, and the life I was standing inside was entirely my own. And Jenna, she had assumed, I think, that my composure was brittleness, that if pressed correctly with the right combination of apology and shared history, I could be softened back into a shape she could manage. She had been wrong about that, as she had been wrong about other things. The social repositioning campaign had backfired quietly. Dana, the mutual book club friend, had eventually heard enough of the documented story, through the natural osmosis of a city the size of Columbus, that she'd stopped being a useful vehicle for Jenna's version of events. The story that circulated was not the one about my coldness or my aggression. It was the one about the forensic accountant and the jewelry and the hotel in Nashville and the 31 transfers and a woman who had handled all of it with her hands perfectly steady. Jenna sent me an email in March, a long one. I could feel, reading it, that it came from a different place than the voicemails and the porch visit. Rawer, less managed, in the specific way of someone who has run out of versions of the story that keep themselves comfortable. I read it twice. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, because I genuinely had nothing to say that would be useful to either of us. That wasn't cruelty. It was just the truth. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in late April. I drove home, let Biscuit out into the backyard, and stood in the kitchen. My kitchen, with the cream walls I was already planning, with the window above the sink where the afternoon light came in at an angle I had finally, fully earned. And I made coffee, 1 sugar, a splash of oat milk. No one brought it to me. No performance of consideration, no rehearsed gesture. Just mine. Just quiet. Just real. The school year ended in June, and I spent that summer rebuilding in the most literal, physical sense. I repainted the kitchen, the warm cream color that Daniel had never liked, and had the back garden landscaped in a way I'd wanted for years, but had always deferred. I bought a new couch for the living room. I donated the set of dishes we'd registered for at our wedding, which had always felt more like his taste than mine, and replaced them with something I chose alone in a shop on a Saturday afternoon, standing in the aisle as long as I wanted. I know how small that sounds, dishes, but if you have ever lived in a space where your own preferences were slowly, gently, politely subordinated to someone else's, in choices so minor they seemed beneath objection, then you will understand that standing in that aisle and choosing freely was not small at all. By September, when I returned to school, something in me had reconstituted, not back to what I'd been in January. That woman was gone, which I didn't mourn. Something more structurally sound. My students noticed it, in the way students notice things about teachers without being able to name what they're noticing. Margaret noticed it. Lynn noticed it. Carrie, when she visited in October, said, "You look like yourself." I met someone in January, a full year after the evening Daniel had sat at my kitchen table. His name was Marcus, and he was a high school history teacher at a school across town, a friend of Margaret's husband who appeared at a dinner party I very nearly didn't attend. We talked about Reconstruction-era literature and regional barbecue differences for 2 hours before I gave him my number. And I want to be clear that I was not looking for him, and that his arrival in my life was not the point of any of what had preceded it. The point had never been to find a replacement. The point had been to build a foundation that was genuinely mine. Marcus was simply a man who was honest and warm and made me laugh, and that turned out to be a great deal. What about Daniel and Jenna? I heard things, as one does in a city of manageable size. Daniel had relocated to a smaller apartment in Grandview. The demotion at the firm had been followed, by the following spring, by a departure. Whether voluntary or otherwise, accounts differed. He was consulting independently now, which in architectural project management means billing at a fraction of your previous rate while maintaining the fiction of entrepreneurial choice. He and Jenna were still together, as far as anyone knew. This was not, I thought, a punishment. It was simply its own reality. Two people who had built their beginning on the shared experience of concealment, now navigating what it meant to be ordinary and visible together. Jenna's freelance design work had suffered. Several clients had, through the same natural Columbus osmosis, become aware of enough of the story to become awkward. She'd lost 2 long-term contracts. She'd moved out of the Short North apartment into something more affordable in Clintonville. We did not speak. I did not engineer that. It was simply the natural outcome of 2 people who no longer had a bridge between them, once the bridge they'd stood on was gone. Did I feel satisfaction? I examined that question honestly, the way I examined most things by then. Not satisfaction exactly, not the sharp pleasure of watching an enemy fall. What I felt was something more like the quiet confirmation that actions produce outcomes, that what Daniel and Jenna had built on was not a foundation but a borrowed surface, and that borrowed surfaces eventually require returning. My foundation was mine. The house, the kitchen with its warm cream walls, the new dishes, biscuit aging gracefully in the backyard, Marcus across the dinner table telling a story about a confused ninth grader who had argued, in all seriousness, that the Civil War had been about horses. I laughed at that story until my eyes watered. When, I thought, was the last time I laughed like this? I couldn't remember. Which told me everything. If this story taught me anything, it's that calm is not the same as weakness, and that the most powerful move is usually the one no one sees coming. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I nodded. I made a list, and I called a lawyer. To anyone listening, the moment someone shows you who they are, believe them completely, immediately, and with both eyes open. Your grief is real. Your anger is valid. But your clarity is your greatest asset, and it is worth protecting above everything else. What would you have done, standing in that kitchen? I'd love to know. Leave a comment. I read everyone. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know.